Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a rare Saturday night version of the National At Home Dad Network's webinar series. Again, we try to work around when our guests can come and join us, and tonight we have Caleb with us, and Caleb is a dad himself, so 8 o'clock worked best for him for being able to get the kids out of his hair and the rest of it. I know Caleb because he and my wife went through residency together, if I'm not mistaken. And we got to be good friends over barbecue. And I know that Caleb definitely enjoys home brewing, which is why I reached out to him to see if he'd talk to us a little bit about it. So without further ado, here's Caleb, and I'll let him introduce himself.
All right. Hey, everybody. So I'm Caleb Whitenack, and like Matt said, yeah, we've known each other now going on probably at least a decade. And we, you're right. Yeah, I think so. And I've been homebrewing for, well, probably almost close to 15 years now. And during residency, I would bring beer to all the barbecues and events like that. And got to talking about that and barbecue and a bunch of other stuff. And yeah, like Matt said, I've got 5 kids now, and ranging from almost 10 all the way to 2 months is the youngest. And we're out. We've got some sound. We're out at the beach having our first beach trip. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. But yeah, so my first experience with home brewing was back in medical school, and one of my buddies said, "Hey, you gotta come try this. It's some of my home brew." And so tried it, and it was mediocre at best, I'd say, but it's pretty cool. You can brew your own beer. And then it was like a year after that, my in-laws for Christmas, our first Christmas together, married, got me a Mr. Beer kit. And I don't know if you guys ever saw those in the Kmart or anything like that, but it's a 2.5 gallon extract brewing, which we'll talk about later. And I got that for Christmas. It's probably like a $40 Kmart special. So the joke is that my mother-in-law got it, and my father-in-law was like, "That's crap. That's never going to make anything close to beer." And so I took it home, and I went through the process, and I ended up with 6 bottles of this like pale ale, beer, and it was like passable beer. And I saved one for him, and he tried it with me, and like a good just beer you'd have with like pizza or something, and real light and clear, came out clear and nice and carbonated. And so, but it really kind of got me thinking, like, if I could make passable beer with a $40 kit from Kmart, like I could do so much better than this. And so my creative, instinct and all my sciencey stuff really kind of started kicking up. And so just started doing some research, and yeah, figured out more of the science behind home brewing and brewing beer in general, and kind of started going from there. And so I looked up some kits, just last night, looking at kind of if you wanted to start home brewing, and we can talk more about that too, but it's like $75 for like a decent kit to get started brewing, like
Okay.
like a 5 gallon batch of something. So all the equipment, like 75, $80, and so it's not too bad, right?
No, not at
And
all.
and the thing is like you can brew 5 gallons of beer, and it's a lot cheaper. So, as opposed to buying 5 gallons worth of, beer from the store kind of thing. So, and the thing I like to do is just, be able to share it like we did in residency, have everybody, try it, get some comments and feedback. And so kept brewing and giving beer away and that kind of thing. And so as I kept doing that, I wanted to expand my system. And so what started as a 5 gallon, food safe bucket, fermenting with that. Now I have a, spike brewing system. It's a 20-gallon system, and it's all automated, and I hit buttons instead of, light light burners and things like that. And so yeah, it's a lot of fun. And so yeah.
So, if somebody was going to turn around and just start doing this on their own, obviously we've all seen the little Mr. Beer kit or the little mini keg that you see,
uh,
like you said, at Walmart, Target, wherever. Usually they show up around Father's Day for some
there you
odd
go. That's
reason.
right.
Um, but going beyond that, you talk about having like a 5 gallon food safe container. What kind of equipment do you need to start with? I mean, is this something that somebody can do just in their own kitchen? Or, I
Totally.
mean, do you have to have like a
Yeah.
dedicated spot like in the garage or what?
Well, yeah, I have a room now, that I brew in, but I started in a 600 square foot bachelor pad in downtown Houston. And so you could do it stovetop, and that's the cool bit about the Mr. Beer kits. Like they're kind of cheesy and stuff like that, but it's extract brewing, and so you don't need a lot of equipment to do extract brewing. And so what that is it's malt extract, or they even easier than that. You can even buy hopped malt extract, and it's basically they've already done the mash. They've taken the grains, they've milled them, they've soaked them in the water, let the enzymes do their magic on breaking down the starches and the simple sugars. And they've got the wort, or basically the sweet wort, and they've boiled that down into like a syrup, a really highly concentrated malt syrup. And you pour that into boiling water, and then you make your wort that's lower sugar content than the syrup, and it's all just calculations and things like that. But they're super easy kits. A lot of local homebrew stores will sell you either an extract kit, a partial mash kit, which we can talk about, and then all grain. So the extract kits, all you need is a big pot, a
Hmm.
big stir stick, and then a food safe bucket. So the Homer bucket from Home Depot, right? The big orange bucket that you see everybody carry around. That's not food safe, but they
Right.
do sell food safe buckets at Home Depot and Lowe's, and you just have to go and look. Generally they're the like white ones
Hmm.
that are food safe on there, and then a lid,
Or, or
and then
honestly, if you happen to know someone who works in the restaurant business,
there you
especially
go.
if they work in fast food, ask them to bring you home a pickle bucket because it's a 5 gallon white bucket that pickles come in.
There you go. And all you would need to do then to that with the lid, hopefully it has like a rubber grommet on it so that it'll seal really good, is drill a hole, and then you put in it's called an airlock, and you fill it with water, and it bubbles, right, as it's fermenting and creating carbon dioxide. It bubbles off, and that's kind of how you can tell, uh, is it still fermenting, is it not, and watch the bubbles. So but yeah, basically you need a big pot, big stir stick, a bucket, and a airlock. And then on the other side, right, you've got to bottle it, right, or peg it if you want to do it that way. But the easiest is probably to start with bottles, and pretty easy. You can get the pop tops with the
Hmm.
little spring. You know, those are easy because you don't have to have a capper. Um,
Like
but the
the old,
cappers are
like
pretty easy.
it's been a while since I've drank leaded beer because I only do the non-alcoholic now. But like back in the old days, so you're talking like the old Grolsch bottles.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Just
yeah, yeah.
I
And
don't
that
know
way,
which brands do that now, but
yeah,
years
and
ago, Grolsch was the one that I remember had the resealable top.
Yes, right. I know that Trader Joe's, they always have, some, about 16 ounce, resealable pot, whatever it is, get it, drink it, and then save the bottles, and then there you go. And they even sell uh, re replacements of the like rubber stoppers too.
Right, right. The
Things
little
that
rubber
make them.
O-ring.
Yep, yep, yep.
Cool.
So,
I mean,
and then
if
and
it
then
came down to it, wouldn't you also be able to just pour it into a growler?
so some growlers. See, here's the thing. So you ferment the beer. So
Right.
now it's leaded. It's got some alcohol in it, but it's not carbonated, right? Because
Oh,
you've
okay.
bubbled off all your CO2 out of the airlock, and so now what you have to do is carbonate it. And so the way you do that is kind of multiple different ways, right? If you're kegging, you can put all the beer in there and then add some sugar, and the yeast that's still kind of in suspension will eat that sugar. And with the sealed keg, same thing with bottles, right? Uh, it'll eat all the sugar 100%, and all the CO2 can't get anywhere. So then it's carbonates it, you
Right.
know. And so the way you do it with bottles, you do it a couple different ways. I've done it both. Both work. Is you can transfer all the beer into another bucket, like an empty bucket, and have your all your sugar in there, and you can then mix it up and then transfer it into the bottles that way. I always felt like that was a lot extra work. So what I would do is I would measure out the exact amount of sugar that you need to carbonate that bottle, the 16-ounce bottle, and there's calculations you can do with that. And I put that amount of sugar in each of the bottles. And then I put the beer in the bottles with just it's like a siphon. They sell some siphons and that kind of thing. And then each individual bottle will carbonate itself, which takes about like a week and a half.
Now, during that carbonation process, I'm assuming that, like all yeast, as it's eating that sugar, it's going to produce additional alcohol as well as CO2.
Yeah, it's generally less than like 0.5%.
Okay.
So yeah, and some, but not significant. Yeah, yeah.
Not any significant like secondary fermentation going on.
Right, typically not, and you want to definitely make sure that it's done fermenting, before you put it in the bottle, because you could definitely end up with some, closet bombs if you don't.
I learned that lesson many, many, many years ago when I was fermenting mead, and someone
Oh yeah.
recommended that we use champagne yeast.
Oh, that stuff will
Yeah,
eat through just
yeah,
about anything.
but
Yeah, yeah.
didn't mention that we should put it in champagne bottles.
Which is like twice as thick glass.
Right, right. So
Yeah,
I had one explode in the closet and take out like two bottles on each side of it with shrapnel. Yeah, it was
yeah,
ugly. It was
yeah.
ugly.
Uh, I
There
remember.
was a big mess.
Yeah, the biggest mess I think I've ever made was a fruited sour, fruited beer, and I put in about like 5 gallon or 5 pounds in a 5 gallon batch, 5 pounds of raspberry puree, and it'll ferment. That has plenty of sugar in it, right? Problem is that it has all the little chunks, and so the chunks went up and clogged the airlock, and the bucket just kept getting pressurized until it exploded in our closet. And
Ooh, that's never
with
good.
raspberry, yeah, that was bad. Yeah,
Yeah,
really bad.
yeah.
Yeah, I got in trouble with
I
that
could
one.
see where that would be bad.
Yeah,
That yeah. So now you mentioned using the extract brewing, and then you
yeah.
said that there was a what was it, partial grain
Partial
or
mash, partial
partial
mash.
mash?
Yeah, so partial
Okay,
mash
so
is a great way to kind of start dipping into a little bit more complex, recipe building and that kind of thing. And so the brunt of the grist or the sugar is going to come from your malt extract. But if you're brewing, say, like a brown ale, a red ale, something like that, you may be using like a pale ale extract. And then what you do is you actually buy the grain from the specialty grains. So some of the red, grains, or some of the roasted malts for the brown, chocolate malts and that kind of thing. And you actually soak those in like a muslin bag in the beer for 45 minutes to an hour or so, and it pulls out those some of the sugars, yes, but the color and flavor out of that. And then you just finish it like you would an extract. You pour in your malted extract and then finish the beer from there. Um, so it's a nice segue into all grain, and all grain brewing is that's where you have the most influence on the beer. You can really fine tune absolutely everything. You can use multiple different base malts. You can use any number of specialty malts. There's different mashes that you can do, a decoction mash or a step mash, and each one of those can impart different flavor on the final beer. But that takes a lot more equipment, right? So you have 20 pounds, sometimes of, cracked grain, and you have to be able to soak all of that and give time for the amylase to break down all the sugars, and then you need to pull all that water off. And so, you've got to either to kind of two big different ways that you can do it. You can do brew in a bag, which is probably the easiest, and it's just like it sounds. You have a big mesh bag, a nylon bag. You put all your grain in there. You dunk it in the pot, and fill it up with water, and then you just pull the bag out. You can imagine 20 pounds of grain soaked with water is pretty heavy, so
Right.
you've got to figure out ways to lift that out of it. But then you just drain it off, and then there's your sweet wort, and
Mhm.
you don't have to mess with all the grains and stuff like that. Another way is then you have a false bottom, and it's a piece of metal that's at the bottom of the kettle that the grain sits on, and it's got all kind of perforations in it, and so you can then pull it off the bottom out of a valve, off the bottom.
Gotcha,
That's another
gotcha. So
way.
like
It drains through. Yeah,
you actually get the pot with a valve at the very bottom, and then gravity will
exactly.
cause everything to drain out with a
Right,
filter at the top,
right,
or
right.
right above where the valve level is.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the way I do it on my spike system. Is I actually have a pump uh, that will. I have a recirculating mash, and so
Hmm.
during the hour mash, I have the pump pull water off the bottom, bring it back to the top, and it goes through the grain bed, and then it pulls off the top, and then it does that for an hour. So it's extremely efficient. Um,
Okay, so it works almost like a coffee percolator.
That's exactly right. Yeah, like a cowboy coffee,
Yeah, yeah, like
stovetop coffee. It pulls and goes up
hmm.
exactly just like that.
Okay,
And it gets the most sugars out of the grain as possible.
okay. So I'm going through in my head what equipment I
Whew.
either have at home or I have easy access to that can reproduce this. Like for instance, you were talking about having the big pot with the false bottom.
Guess right.
Um, Having worked for a large amount of my career before becoming a stay-at-home dad as a chef, what most people don't understand is that restaurant supply stores are open to the public for the most part.
Yeah.
For instance, in Raleigh, North Carolina, there's a store called what is it? United Restaurant Supply.
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah.
It's over on
Yeah.
South Saunders.
Yep. Yep.
You can pull in there, and if you want to buy a 20-gallon stock pot, they have it there.
That's
And
awesome.
they will charge you the exact same price that they would charge a restaurant to buy it. Now, it will not be pretty. It will not match anything in your kitchen. It will be industrial, like aluminum with thick walls. It'll be heavy. It'll be ugly, but it will be completely indestructible and functional. And they
And
sell
probably
stock.
cheaper than
Oh,
a 20-gallon brew pot. you know.
Possibly. I don't know what the brew pots cost, but I know that they sell stock pots that specifically have that bottom drain
Ah,
because
see,
as
that's
you make a
yeah.
stock, all of the ingredients will float up to the top as a raft, and then you can drain the stock from the bottom without having
Oh,
to pour everything through a strainer, which tends to give you a cloudy stock. So
interesting.
then it would just be a matter of getting some sort of mesh thing to block the grains from going
Well,
down, but that doesn't seem
and
like it would be that difficult.
no, it's really not. They sell grain bags, for like $15, for a 20-pound grain bag, and you just throw that in. It has a drawstring at the top. You drawstring it
Hmm.
at the top of the pot. Um, yeah, I mean, I've actually done way more batches of beer with brew in a bag than I have, any other way, because
Okay.
it's pretty efficient. Cleanup is so much easier, and yeah, good way to
So
go.
so the next question that I have is that you've talked a whole lot about like the grains and getting your wort and getting your sugars because that's the beginning of fermentation right there. But the two other ingredients that every beer has to have are both yeast and then hops. Well, they don't have to
Right.
have hops, but we like them with hops.
Yeah, that's right.
But you haven't brought up yeast at all.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I know that that's a big question because different yeasts do a lot of different things. Being a non-drinker myself, recently I have found out that there's a big movement among homebrewers of non-alcoholic beer. And apparently they have now been discovering specific strains of yeast that will still eat just as much sugar
Uh-huh.
as the regular yeast. They just don't actually produce alcohol above a certain level no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I've they're obviously, the hard seltzer and non-alcoholic beer and that kind of thing. It's huge right now, and so yeah, I mean the homebrew supply, groups are really trying to get in on that, and so yeah, I've definitely seen some. They're engineering some, and they are going to eat some of the sugars, but there's also different ways. That's what I was talking about with the all grain is, and there's so many different ways to do the mash. You can mash at really high temperatures and create a lot of really complex sugars instead of the simple sugars. Yeast love simple sugars, right? And so if
Mm-hmm.
you mash at a different temperature, you can create such complexity that the yeast just can't do it. And then you get the flavor because the yeast adds so much flavor without as much of the alcohol too. But yeah, I mean, the specific yeast can definitely, do that as well. And yeah, I've had plenty of people tell me that the yeast actually is probably 70-80% of the flavor of most of the beers. You think of Hefeweizen, or uh, the Belgians, right? All the Trappist,
Oh,
beers and that kind of thing, right?
lambics.
So yeah, exactly. So when you think of one of those kind of beers, you're thinking of the yeast flavor, right? That clove, banana esters of the Hefeweizen and that just distinct Belgian flavor of the Trappist type beers, and so that's all yeast, and so there's definitely a lot of different suppliers. White Labs over in Asheville, and Y Yeast, and Omega, and Imperial, and a bunch of other different types. But uh, they all kind of have their strains, and each strain produces different kind of flavors. And uh, the attenuation is exactly what you were talking about. How much do they attenuate? Meaning how much sugar will they consume and eat and turn into alcohol? So, and all that's printed on the labels and that kind of thing. But there's different types as well. So you can get the dried yeast. I mean, just like bread yeast, right? In a
Hmm.
full packet, they sell brewer's yeast that way as well. Um, I prefer the liquid. That's just kind of a personal preference, but I've used plenty of the dry yeast out of convenience. You can have just a whole bunch of packs in your refrigerator and not have to worry about it. Just toss that and it'll go just the same.
I'm assuming much like the live yeast cultures that you get for baking, the liquid yeast is going to be a little bit more finicky as far as you accidentally killing it.
Yeah, so you gotta, yeah, I mean, you gotta keep it cold. You gotta, some of them, depending on the which one, like, I mean, you gotta obviously use them within a good time frame. The dry yeast will last a long time.
Ages.
Yeah, exactly. And so if it's a little old, you've got to kind of baby it to get it going and happy again. Make a yeast starter, basically like a little mini beer,
Mm-hmm.
a liter, something like that, and kind of just let that go and get happy again. Uh, and then you can pitch that into the bigger beer.
All right, well, we have a couple of questions that have already
Great.
popped up from people watching. One of them comes from Jason, who popped in a little late. Jason asked that he's saying, so you recommend the brewing in a bag for somebody just starting out? And I was going to point out that Jason probably missed the part earlier where you were talking about the extract brewing. So you might want to give a quick recap of that for for
Sure.
Jason. And then
Yes.
the other question
Oh
before
yeah.
you start on that is in true dad form. The first question we got was, what is the ground speed of an unladen swallow?
That's right. Uh, so I'll pass on the second one. But yeah,
Right.
that's it. Yeah, no. The first one, so extract. That's probably the easiest way to get started, just because you don't have to have quite as much equipment. And once you kind of understand the actual like brewing process, the boil, and we'll talk about hops. You asked about hops, and so we'll talk about that too. You get a couple beers under your belt with the extract, and then very easily can move into brewing a bag. And there's plenty of good kits out there. Austin Homebrew. Back when I was in Austin, that's a great homebrew store, one of the biggest mail order in the country, Austin Homebrew. They have great kits, but there's plenty of others. More beer, uh, you know, uh, and I would actually probably, if you could, just look around local and see if you can find a local homebrew store and support the local businesses, and they can put together a good kit too, brew in a bag or otherwise. Yeah.
Cool, cool. Now you brought up my favorite topic, which is hops.
Oh yeah.
Again, I quit drinking a little over 7 years ago, so it was right as the IPA craze was starting to really hit.
Yeah.
And luckily, in the last couple of years, the non-alcoholic beer world has exploded. And one of the first markets that they exploded into was IPAs.
Yeah.
For the longest time, non-alcoholic beer choices were pretty much bad lagers and pilsners.
Yeah.
And now we've got some really, really nice IPAs out there, and they're starting to move into the world of sours and that, but we'll get into that down the road. But as far as IPAs, hops are king. And
Absolutely.
the real question is, when do they go in? Where do they go in? Where do you get them? I mean,
Yeah.
I planted a Cascade hop vine in my backyard last year. I think it's
Awesome.
all of like a foot and a half tall now. So,
Yeah.
maybe in another 10 or 12 years, I'll get a hop off of it.
Yes, that's right. It's amazing when those really get going. It's almost like you could watch them grow. You go out in the morning and it's here, and then you go out at night and it's like a foot taller. It's amazing. But yeah, so you can add hops, first wort hops. Basically, as soon as you pull off of the grain, you can add hops then, even before it starts boiling. You add the boil hops anytime during the boil, beginning, in that kind of thing. Flame out hops. So flame out, if you're brewing with gas, right? You turn off the gas, boom, flame out hops. Then the big thing with NEPA's, the hazy IPAs, is the whirlpool hops, right? So it, with whirlpool, where the name came for is basically, like I was talking about with my system with the recirculation. you can have another port in the kettle that shoots it sideways, and so it basically creates a whirlpool. Literally, is exactly what it is. And when you pitch hops in at that time with this whirlpool, it gets great contact with the beer, and science people, right? You know, as a spinning liquid spins, all the solids then go to the middle and create kind of like this cone of all the debris and solids. And so you, again, like you're talking about with the stock and that kind of thing, right, Matt? You'll pull off clean wort because all the hops are down the middle. So that's the whirlpool hops, and then everybody's favorite dry hops, right? And so that's in the fermentation vessel, and used to, you know, back in the like West Coast IPA days, right? You'd wait until it was completely done fermenting, boom, and then you'd pitch your dry hop, let it set, sometimes as much as like 2 weeks, which is kind of crazy to think about now. Uh, but we thought, you know, you really needed that time to contact time with the hops to get that flavor. But now people are, you know, they're pitching hops at the same time they're pitching the yeast sometimes, or waiting until it's at, you know, high craisin, which is like the most active fermentation, then, you know, pitching it, and then, you know, still pitch it at the end of fermentation as well. But each one of those will add different kind of flavors and aromas to the finished beer.
So for those of us like myself who tend to like dive into hobbies way too much, ask my wife about my coffee problem. Um, the real question that I have is that I'm sure that there's got to be a good resource as far as a book for somebody who's looking to
Yeah,
get into this, because a lot of the stuff that you're saying makes complete sense to me. And then every now and then you'll throw out some jargon or you'll throw out a concept and it just completely goes over my head. And I feel like if I could get my hands on a decent book and read my
yeah,
way through it a couple of times, I'd be able to follow a little bit more of what's going on in this conversation.
yep, 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 yep. So there's, I think it's just the joy of home brewing. I think is one of them. One of the kind of standby, you know, good book. Uh, the head brewer, Sam, I forget his last name, from Dogfish Head, he did a pretty good one too. Then there's Extreme Brewing. Extreme Brewing really goes through kind of some creative ways to get extreme in the hobby and that kind of thing. Uh, and you know, creating your own recipes using, you know, weird ingredients and weird sugars, you know,
I mean,
turbinado sugar.
isn't that the thing now with your hot wing beer and
Oh
Twinkie
yeah,
beer and
I saw a bacon and eggs beer the other day, and I passed that one. I didn't try that one, but you know, you can literally put anything. Do you remember at one of the events I did a bacon beer?
I do remember that. I
That's
do
right.
remember that.
Yeah,
I
and
believe
it
that
turned
was the
out pretty
same.
good.
I believe that was the same pork fest that we showed up with bacon fudge.
That is, oh, which was amazing. That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
and I
so
believe somebody did bacon bourbon that year as well.
somebody did, and it was good.
Yeah,
They did do
I
bacon
don't.
bourbon.
I didn't get
Yeah,
to taste the bourbon,
yeah.
but
But yeah, I mean, so you can do all kind of crazy stuff, and really, it's your imagination can just run wild with it. I brewed a blue beer, uh, you know, some months ago. I named it Smurfin' Safari, and uh, it's a pineapple orange kettle sour. Okay, and I made it blue with spirulina extract. Okay, which is you know, they pull the spirulina, it's an algae, and they pull all the blue pigment out of it. And I just put that in the fermentation vessel, and the beer is blue and like
okay.
Smurf blue. And you know, so somebody asked me, why would you do that? And I'm like, why not? You can do anything with home brewing. So,
And my question is just, does it come out the same color as Blueberry cereal used to make us come out?
oh yeah, yeah, that's right. It, it, I wish it did. That would be
Oh,
cool, but no, it doesn't. Yeah. Um,
because
Probably because it's
again,
natural, right?
I'm in a beer group on Facebook, and I'm
Uh,
one of the few people in the group who's a non-alcoholic beer person. But apparently, one of the new things that a lot of people are doing now is beer with glitter in them.
I have seen that. I've actually had a couple of glitter beers. It
Okay.
is quite the novelty, I'd say. But I in the end, like I want the beer to really taste good, right? I don't know about the yeah, but it's kind of fun. Yeah, why
I
not?
mean, like,
Yeah,
the glitter's not bringing
okay.
any flavor to the party.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, going back to the hops, you did ask,
Yes.
where to get them. So I get most of my hops from Yakima Valley hops. Yakima Valley is
Neighbors are fun.
yeah, that's right. Seriously, Yakima Valley's in the where they come from, and Yakima Valley hops. I feel like they have the freshest hops. They have the biggest selection, and different like types of hops. I guess would not like formulations of hops. I guess because you've got hop pellets, and so you get a hop off the vine, you dry it, kiln it, whatever, and then they press it through dyes to get these uh, pellets, and that's probably the easiest to use just because they're easily stored. They don't take as much space, and they don't soak up quite as much of your beer. So the pellets. Then you've got leaf hops. That's just dried hops. Some people, claim that because they didn't get pushed through that dye, which heats up the hop a little bit, that they actually have better flavor. I could believe that. I've done plenty of dry hopping with leaf hops. They just have so much vegetable matter that it soaks up too much beer. So
Fair.
I don't do that. Uh, then they have this new stuff called the Lupomax, and they
Wait,
basically, I don't know
one
the
more time. What was
process,
that? Lupa
but
Max?
Lupomax, and the
Lupo.
so
Okay.
lupulin. If you look at a hop, you break it open. There's the green outside, and on the inside is the ooey gooey resiny lupulin, and that's what gives you all the flavor. And when you say hops, you're actually talking about the lupulin. So this product, Lupomax, they basically remove like 90 plus percent of all the vegetable matter, and you're left with this yellow ooey gooey uh, lupulin in a pellet form, and so it's like double strength almost. It's like adding twice as much hops as you normally would. So pretty cool.
But does that limit the flavor? I mean, again, I'm more of a drinker and never actually brewed any.
Yeah.
My concern would be by removing all that vegetable matter, does that limit the flavor profiles that you're going to get, where you're not going to be able to get some of those lighter, more floral flavors that you get off of some hops versus the more
So
resinous and
right.
piney ones?
So I would say that the Lupomax type style of hops, that is definitely pushing the envelope on the hazy IPAs. Excuse me. Instead of like your noble hops that you would use in something like a pilsner or something like that. Like they're not making the Lupomax hop type stuff out of that kind of thing. So yeah.
Okay. And when you say you were talking about the Yakima Valley
Yeah.
hops, is that a different company than Yakima Chief?
That Yakima Chief is another one. Now I've definitely ordered from Yakima Chief, and they have kind of their own version of the Lupomax. They call it cryo hops, and same kind of thing, same concentrated kind of effect. And so yeah, some people go with the Yakima Chief, some Yakima Valley, both really good. Yeah.
That's it. The only reason I'm familiar with the Yakima Chief is that they're the ones who put out the Pink Boots blend
Oh, that's exactly
in
right. Yeah,
March.
yeah, they did.
That
That's right.
they
Yeah.
put out several of the hop blends that are used to do some of the charity beers that are out there.
Yeah, I think another one was like Triumph. It was another one. I can't remember what that one was for, but yeah, the Pink Boots and yeah, they've been doing a lot of really cool stuff with that. Yeah.
Which is something that's really interesting is how much like really nice charity work is happening in the beer well, at least in the craft beer world.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I'm sure that the InBevs and the rest of them out there are probably doing charity work too, but I don't know much about it because I don't pay that much attention to them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, so overall, when we're talking about like being able to get the different hops, is that something that you order direct, or is that something that you would also be able to get through your local brew supply?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The local homebrew supplier, they'll have a whole refrigerator full of generally any kind of hop you could ever want. But because I brew so much and I brew pretty big batches. Is I'll order directly from Yakima Valley. They FedEx stuff, and so it gets here just in a couple days. Not spending too much time in the hot sun and hot truck kind of thing. But yeah, I'll order pounds at a time, and a lot of times they'll give you discounts for larger orders and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a good way to go. And yeah, I just throw it in the freezer. So I have an outdoor freezer that or out a garage freezer that's just full of hops.
Fair enough.
So
But for someone who's just starting out, because that's one of the things that I'm looking at with this webinar here, is just the idea that there's a lot of the stay-at-home dad community that I know that's really into beer. We throw a big convention every year at the National At-Home Dad Network, and one of the big events that started off as a one-night event, and if I'm not mistaken, we're now up to at least 2 nights, is that because we have dads that come from all over the nation, and a few of them now that are flying in from overseas,
that's awesome.
we do a beer swap
Yeah,
where everybody brings whatever local beers they can get their hands on that somebody else might not be able to have, and usually one of the guys donates their room. And throughout the evening, people just come in and out of the room, and it's, hey, everybody gets to try everybody else's stuff.
that sounds great. Yeah,
So like this year, I'm showing up with a whole bunch of like, odd and different non-alcoholic stuff just to prove to some of the guys that you can actually make good beer without alcohol. But I figured that a lot of the guys would be interested, like me, in potentially starting this as a new hobby.
yeah,
And for somebody who's just starting out, they're probably not going to want to go online and buy poundage
yeah. I
of
would I would
anything.
just go local.
For
Yeah, go
somebody
local.
starting out, your best bet would be to go to that local brew supply store.
Yeah,
And
I would say so. Yeah, and you can even the thing what I used to do all the time, like with the brew in the bag. I'm brewing 5 gallons. I go to the homebrew shop and I have my recipe in mind that I want to do. I get the grain, I get the yeast, I get the hops, and I have my satchel of ingredients. And depending on the beer, that could range from $20 all the way on up to $80. Depending. If I'm brewing a huge
but
imperial
but
stout or
again,
something like that. Yeah,
but again, $80 for 5 gallons
that's right.
is not a huge investment compared to buying 5 gallons of beer.
Yes, right. Well, and especially if you're pumping out a 12% imperial stout, you're going to pay. I mean, you go to bottle shop and you buy a imperial stout that's up at that range. You're paying $8, just for a 12 to 16 ounce can. So
Okay.
so yeah, it's definitely cost worth it. Yeah,
Definitely cost effective. Now, the
yeah.
next question that I have is that It's always intimidating to be starting a new hobby. And one of the hardest parts is that inherent feeling of ignorance that you have. How bad is it when you walk into the home brew shop and you let them know that you're new? Is it that hipster mentality of, oh, look, here's the green guy, let's give him a
Yeah.
hard time? Or is it more of a welcoming community?
Oh man, I think you know the homebrew of all the different hobbies, and I've got a lot too. You know it, and is it's the easy. It's very communal, and hey, let me help you. Oh my gosh, you're new. This is what I would have told somebody, that I wish I knew, when I was getting started and that kind of thing. So, uh, I'm just thinking of my local homebrew store. Uh, I hear them all the time talking to somebody new, and it's like, well, do I need that? No, you don't need that. You need just something like this to get started. And so, really, if you just walk into the homebrew store and tell them, I've never done this before. I heard extract might be the way to go at first, and they'll get you set up. Yeah, and
All right,
hopefully
now,
for under about $100. That's equipment and grain, or
okay.
supplies. For about
Right. Yeah,
$100 you can
enough
get
to make
started.
your first batch.
That's right. Yeah.
And Jason just asked the question that's been in the back of my mind the whole time. Tell us the truth. Exactly how bad is the first batch somebody makes gonna taste? How
Okay.
bad is it gonna be?
So if I had a bottle of my very first batch, the batch that I made out of the Mr. Beer kit, the from Kmart, that was probably on that shelf for the last 3 or 4 years, right? Before I, was gifted it. And that's if she got it at Kmart. That could have been like over at, Goodwill. So who knows? But it was passable beer. It really was. Like, it definitely wouldn't have won any awards, but it was clear, carbonated, fairly malty, and had a little bit of hop flavor and that kind of thing. And so it was passable. And so the main thing, and I think any home brewer would say this, is you've got to be super like intense on sanitation. So you can't just buy the bucket from Home Depot and dump it in there thinking, oh, it looks clean, right? Is you've got to use a brewery level sanitizer. So Star San is the one that I use. It's a food grade acid that you could eat it if you wanted, kind of thing, but it kills all bacteria, and it really cleans things up really, really nice. And so anything that touches the beer needs to be cleaned with Star San. And that, if you're really, really good with your sanitation, even if your process wasn't ideal with brewing, as long as everything was sanitized, you will make passable beer.
Now, when you say passable, one of the comments we just got was, so if I can still drink shitty beer, I can handle my first batch. When you say
Absolutely. Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
say passable, can you compare it to a macro brew that everybody has had, like
Okay.
passable as in,
There you go. Okay.
like Colt 45 passable, or Bud Light passable?
So if you take a Bud Light, or even just the regular strength, Budweiser, that kind of thing, and you let it warm up, right? That you see all the signs: ice cold beer, super icy, 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 cold, cold, cold. That's because it dulls your taste buds, right? When it's that cold, you can't taste much of anything. If you let that beer warm up, it really won't taste very good at all. And so your first batch, should taste better than warm Budweiser. It should.
Okay.
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 I would think,
Even I remember choking down warm Budweiser before, so I
yeah, it's
think
not
I can manage.
not a, it's not super pleasant, right? And
No.
so you will, especially keeping everything sanitized and running through, getting fresh ingredients, just like cooking, right? If you can get fresh hops, right, you get your grain, freshly milled and all of that. Yeah, I mean, it'll turn out great. And so that was really, what I said at the beginning. That first beer was like, hey, this is actually not so bad. I could do so much better than this. And then that just spurred things on, and learn more about what's it take to make a recipe. How do you create recipes and that kind of thing. And so yeah, that Joy of Homebrewing, great book to kind of get started on the ins and outs of brewing.
Cool. Now, one question I was going to ask, you kept talking about buying like fresh milled grains and that type of
Yeah.
thing. And you know me, I'm like a food guy, and I'm all about like having every piece of equipment that I can possibly justify owning.
Yep.
So the real question is there, do you mill your own grains?
I do. I have again, in kind of my brew room. I've got stacks of grain. I've got a mill and everything. So I can wake up and the whole freezer full of hops thing. So I can wake up and say, hey, you know what, I want to brew today, and then I'll go make my recipe. Pull it out of whatever I've got, mill it, brew, boom, done. Uh, you can do it different ways, right? You can buy, just like you mentioned, coffee, right? Really want good coffee, you want to grind those beans right before you do your pour over, right? So I, I would say as long as it was milled, probably I might get, comments about this, I don't know, but like a week, before you brew, that's probably okay, right?
No, I mean
Um,
that makes sense.
the problem is that, I mean, this is a food, right? And once you crack that shell, now it's open. It can get stale. It can it's exposed to the elements,
Well,
and
not only that, but by milling it, you're increasing surface area, which
right.
speeds up oxidation. And yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean it makes complete sense to me.
So what I typically do, right, is if I'm brewing on a Saturday, I'll go Friday. I'll go Friday to the homebrew shop, get the ingredients that I need. They'll measure if you're doing a brew in the bag, right? They'll measure out all your grain. They'll mill it, put it in a bag, hand it to you, and then you use it that next day. And that's ideal.
Okay, well, I mean, no, that makes sense. And again, the idea that it only takes around a moderate amount of equipment. As far as the extract brewing goes, I'm pretty certain I can do that with equipment that I already have in my house because I know I have a well over 5 gallon stock pot somewhere.
There you go. Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I've got a stock pot that's almost as big as I am. You've seen me cook crawfish.
Right.
You
That's
know,
right.
I am sure it's there. I just have to, I just have to like hunt it down and probably scrub a good bit of the crawfish funk out of it
Yeah,
because
yeah, there
that
you
might have
go.
soaked into that
Yeah.
aluminum wall.
Yeah. Well,
The
actually, you know what? Another kind of cheap way to go, and I did this for a couple years. You go to Walmart right around Thanksgiving,
hmm
and you buy one of the turkey fryers, and that's I think about a 7 gallon pot. It's
hmm
aluminum. It's better if it's stainless steel, but aluminum will work fine. It's good heat transfer and all of that. And you're not fermenting in it; you're just boiling in it, and so um, that's perfect. That's a perfect you know size, and I think you can find them at Walmart for about $40, especially after Thanksgiving. Wait till after Thanksgiving, go the next day, get a turkey fryer for like $40, and it's got the 7 gallon pot, and then propane burner too. So
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say I have the propane burner already from my crawfish setup, but
yeah, yeah,
again, gas stove in the kitchen's a lot easier to control
and then
temp
there's
with.
that. Yeah, exactly. So
Just because the propane burner is great, but that Saturn V rocket tends to have an on and an off. There's not a lot of simmer room in there.
yeah, that's right.
But other than that, wait, we got one more. Where'd it go? Okay. So, what about beers that are flavored with scotch or whiskey? If I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, most of that comes from barrel aging. Is that correct?
So yeah, in the big breweries, right? They'll buy spent bourbon barrels, whiskey barrels, rum barrels. Now sometimes you can find, and they'll put the beer after it's fermented. A lot of times, right, into the barrel, and then just let it sit. Some of them I've seen go as much as like 17, 18 months in a barrel, really pulling out all those flavors. Well, barrels are expensive. And unless you're planning on putting, 55 gallons right into something big barrel, you can find some small barrels. Okay, I think it's Barrels Unlimited. I think you can find some 1, 2, 3, 5, 10-gallon barrels. Now they're not used; they're fresh barrels, on that. And so you'd have to make your own bourbon barrel, put some bourbon in it, let it sit, and that kind of thing. Here's the way I do it. So you can buy oak chips, right, from the homebrew supply store. Oak chips, oak chunks, um, and even like old staves, from barrels and that kind of thing. Cut them up yourself. But I use the oak chips. Again, you mentioned surface area, so surface area is king when you're trying to extract flavor. So I'll take a quart jar, throw a bunch of oak chips in it, and then just fill it up with bourbon or fill it up with scotch. I have some, uh, forget which scotch it is, but one of the eyelid scotches and soaking in oak chips. A couple weeks is probably all it really takes because these are little tiny chips and they soak up all that bourbon. And then you put the oak chips in. I generally throw the bourbon in too, just for a little extra kick. But yeah, that's how I get the bourbon barrel aged flavor is these oak chips.
Okay, I was going to say another option that might be possible, and again, I'm not sure on the exacts of it, but I know that on Amazon you can actually buy like charred wood sticks that are designed to put into whiskeys and that type of thing for aging.
Yeah, yeah,
I say that mostly because I was looking the other day. A couple of companies have begun producing non-alcoholic bourbons and
oh,
having. Oh, no, no, don't get excited. There's no
oh,
reason to get
not,
excited.
more in theory
Yeah,
right now, I guess. Yeah,
it's very good theoretically. The first one that I tried was quite nice. It had a really good smoky flavor. It just didn't have any of that sour mash flavor that you
yeah,
expect of a bourbon.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Like it tasted smoky. It vaguely had a little bit of that liquor burn, but in a mixed drink, it's fine.
yeah.
I got another one that had slightly better flavor, but it had absolutely no smoke to it. So I was honestly thinking about like going online and buying like a heavily charred stave and like throw it in.
There you go. Yeah,
Yes, you're right. The non-alcoholic bourbon is called part of a syrup. You're correct.
yeah, yeah.
I will say, in its defense, it serves a purpose. I find that mixed with a good ginger beer and a nice little squirt of lime juice, it makes a very nice cocktail type thing to drink. I wouldn't call it a Kentucky Mule.
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't call it a bourbon drink. It's its own thing, but it's better than drinking soda.
There you go. That's right.
And for those of us who can't have the leaded stuff, it's an alternative. It is an alternative. But again, not beer, not something home brewed, but they definitely do sell like the pre-charred staves. Most of these were like French oak with a
Okay.
heavy char on them, or you
Yeah,
could direct the different char levels.
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't see a lot of American oak. My question would be that I know from the barbecuing and the smoking work that I've done, they do sell wood chips that are made out of used Jack Daniel's bourbon barrels.
and I have used those in beers multiple times. Yeah, Walmart has a
And they work?
bag. Yeah, yeah, and it works. Yeah, I
Okay.
generally when again going back to the sanitation, right? So I don't know how long that's been sitting in Walmart's shelf. In that, and I don't know where those oak chips came from the barrel to that bag. So you know, bourbon, at least 40%, right? I throw some bourbon in it, give it some good shakes, few nights in it, and then it goes into the beer,
Yeah.
and it will be
No,
fine. Yeah.
that makes complete sense. You know as much work as I do with like dry cured meats and that
Oh
type
yeah.
of thing.
Same thing.
I get the sanitation thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You cannot stress it enough. Properly sanitizing equipment means the difference between making a delicious fermented item and potentially getting people really sick.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Um,
it is not it's not just a matter of, ooh, this may end up coming out tasting bad. That's
yeah.
the best outcome if
Yeah.
you mess up sanitation.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and you can tell. I've had other people's homebrew too. You can tell like something that's the process hasn't been done right. You expose it to oxygen too much. After fermentation, it gets kind of oxidized. You're maybe it got exposed to light and got like they call it skunked.
Hmm.
You can maybe it was again in a bucket, but by the sunshine by window, didn't get skunked, but it was too hot while it was fermenting, and it can then the yeast starts acting differently at different temperatures, and you can get some like esters, not like pleasant esters like some of the beers can have. And and then with your sanitation, yeah, you can taste that some of those off bugs that kind of get in there and mess up the beer flavor. So
Well, look, we are at 9 o'clock now. So, as you know, having five kids, a lot of these guys are probably waiting to go kiss kids goodnight, read them
right.
bedtime stories, or whatever. Let's see. I got one last comment popping in here. No matter how much you drink, no one pukes after two or three drinks. That's definitely a sanitation issue. That is probably true. That is
Yeah,
probably true.
yeah,
I could I could see that. But look, Caleb, I just want to thank you for
oh
coming
yeah,
on, man. It's been a blast. Now that we're both vaccinated, I'd love to have you come by and hang out.
oh heck yeah,
And you and I could talk a little bit more in depth about this because I really want to try this out. I
yeah,
really do.
absolutely, and I've got some equipment for you too. So
Sweet.
yeah,
All right. Well, look, on behalf of the National At Home Dad Network, we want to thank you for coming out. I want to thank everybody who's watching here. And for those who missed a part of this or weren't able to catch it live, this, like all of our webinars, will be available as long as it's out there, available on our YouTube channel. We maintain several different playlists, but all the old webinars are on there. We also have all of our podcasts that are done by Danny and Brock. So feel free to come out and check out what we have there. And tune in next month. I don't have the exacts on it, but if I am not mistaken, we actually have a researcher that's going to be coming on in July to talk with us about the latest results from the U.S. Census and the state of fatherhood and stay-at-home dads and involved dads in general here in America and what the statistics show us is happening all over. So, it might not be quite as jovial as this one, but it'll definitely be a good bit of information for everybody. So until next month, I just want to thank everybody for coming out, and I hope you all have a great evening. Bye.